we face today, that we have so much promise through the SCFTA, yet a lot of skepticism. And that is one of the issues we seek to address in this conversation and shed light on the salient issues underlying the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Some history dates back to 21st of March 2018, when 44 African states put their signature to the agreement, which then gave life to the SCFTA, and trading under this framework kicked off formally on the 1st of January 2021. That's after a delay. Initially, it was meant to start in July 2020, but thanks to COVID, it was delayed. So with my guests, we have Honorable Dr. Peter Mathuki, the Secretary General of the East African Community, who's joining us. We also have Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, that is UNCTAD, and they will be our discussants this morning. Arnold, do we have them? Great. Let me just kick off with a question to Dr. Peter Mathuki. If you can get me clearly, 11 months since we kicked off trading under the framework of the SCFTA, what gains are we realizing as far as this is concerned when it comes to deepening regional trade?
Good morning, Ara, and indeed in East Africa, we are still in the afternoon. Hope you can hear me. Let me start by thanking you and, of course, congratulating the National Media Group for hosting this very important edition of KUSI, and take the opportunity again for inviting us. And again, most importantly, appreciate the presence of our heads of states for, again, showing interest in this. Thank you, Chairman Kiboro. Steve yourself. Let me start by saying the following. That indeed every longest journey begins with a single step. And the fact that we started in the 1st of January, that tells you that indeed as Africa, we are keen on it. One thing I must appreciate is that the political goodwill is still alive. There's a lot of impetus and expectations are all over. Indeed, I want to agree with the chairman, Kiboro, that we need to start telling our own story. And if it was a story of SCFTA in another continent, it would be a very huge story. We need to start now appreciating that we need to tell our story. We must appreciate that a lot has happened and is still happening. And I think we need to nurture this baby SCFTA, because from where I sit, it's a game changer for our continent. And therefore, I think it's important that we nurture it. But let me say that since the beginning of the year, 11 months down the line, a few things have happened. One is that from where I sit as East Africa, already we have 5 partner states of the 6 of them who have ratified this SCFTA, which I think is again a good gesture. Again, of 54 countries of the 55 have signed, 39 have ratified and deposited their instruments, which is a good progress. But again, and which is very important, is about the tariff rights. And we must appreciate that offers that determine goods and services that qualify for duty-free. This has commenced. And the fact that we have, once this is adopted, then it is obviously, this will trigger businesses, domestic implementation measures, increasing market access, etc. But again, ourselves in East Africa, we are at now 85.86. Again, the SCFTA 90 in terms of the tariff lines, liberalization, which I think it's something that is making progress. 87% of the tariff lines, I think there's a lot of impetus, there's a lot of willingness to push this forward. And I think from where I sit, it's important that we appreciate that 6 countries have submitted the initial offers on trading services, which is something that will try to align this with the guidelines that are used for negotiating this. The second phase of negotiations again on investment, intellectual property rights policy have commenced. And indeed, negotiations on digital trade and protocol, particularly on women and youth, have begun. And therefore, I think when you come to even systems like the disputes settlement systems, they have begun. And that tells you that we are set. And this first year really starts the momentum that is given by the first 11 months will determine and give face on what we are likely to achieve from SDFT.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mathuki. And let me hold you at that point and just recap some of the things that you have mentioned is that within the East African region.
So I think these are good efforts and again, institutional ecosystem to facilitate the intra-trade. And these things are happening simply because to facilitate and prepare for our trading across the continent. So these are a few things that are happening that demonstrate that is ready for SCFTA. And I think we need really to tell our own story on what is happening.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for your introductory thoughts on this issue. 5 out of 6 member states of the East African Community have already ratified the documents as far as the SCFTA is concerned. Tariff liberalization discussions are still ongoing to ensure that we have a seamless framework in place. Negotiations for the harmonization of policies and particularly the subject of protocols is something which is being held at the negotiation stage right now. Thank you for those thoughts, and let me just remind us that this is the new normal, so you'll notice a bit of hanging when it comes to the transmission. We ask you to bear with us. Let me cross over to Rebecca Greenspan, the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and really just to get your quick introductory thoughts. 11 months ever since trading under the framework of the SCFTA started. What steps have been made forward when it comes to Africa and the regional integration landscape? Sound, please. We seem to be having a challenge in terms of getting her audio. Madam Rebecca, if you could bear with us, we shall be back to you shortly as our technical team addresses the challenge that we are facing. Arnold, you'll update me as soon as we have that back. And let's get back to Dr. Peter Mathuki from Tanzania. You mentioned something around the harmonization of policies and protocols, and one of the sticky issues around the SCFTA has been the issue of the investment protocol and how this will be harmonized given the extent to which we have various regional integration bodies across the continent. How do you see this being done so that we realize some of the gains which this morning have been mentioned by the Secretary General of the SCFTA itself?
Indeed, very insightful issues that were mentioned by the Secretary General, my brother Wamkele, investment protocols. And from where I see it as Secretary General of the East African Community, I think it would be important that this could be harmonized across the region. We have a number of RECs in the continent. And for example, what we have in East Africa, we could see what is happening in the Southern Africa and Western Africa and compare and see what can work for the continent. So I think there's that should be taking place between different RECs, particularly this region, and we borrow the best practices. So I think it's the high time now we move from discussions and what we think for action. And action is trying to put together documents that we think can work for our own continent. And obviously, regional economic blocks, the East African Community has been quite ahead on a number of some of these things. Some of the protocols that we've already signed, Common Market Protocol, Customs Union Protocol, and these protocols, of course, promote investment. They intend to increase the intra-EAC trade. So similarly, we could use those documentation that are already existing to see how to boost the intra-Africa trade. And this will be possible if we learn from what already is existing. And that is something that I can say. As from East Africa, we are ready to share this information with the rest. We sit down at a round table. Already we are discussing about a discussion with the CFTA Secretariat to see how then this can be used it's a benchmark for obviously having a protocol that can work for the continent.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peter Mathuki, essentially telling us that the various regional blocs are at this point comparing best practices when it comes to investment protocol and ensuring that then they have a platform under which they harmonize this, and this is a matter which has been cascaded to the Secretariat. Let me cross over to Madam Rebecca Greenspan. Sorry for the initial hitch you had in terms of getting your audio. Let's get your thoughts. 11 months down the line, what gains have been realized under SEFTA?
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I think that is very important what the Secretary General just said. First, because this is a long-term project. You cannot expect this project to have all the benefits in 1 year. But the important thing is that there will be benefits from the beginning. Just the idea of having a continental free trade area will give a lot of benefits to Africa. And according to our very recent launch report, precisely on the Africa Free Trade Agreement, we think that a trade in Africa can grow 33%, $22 billion more of trade, and that could really boost productivity, can help small and medium-sized industries and businesses, and is able to give Africa really the opportunity for inclusive growth. So really, I think that this is very important, Julians, and we have to keep the perseverance, the vision, the long-term vision for the integration of Africa into a real continental free trade area.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, telling us the perspective that we should have in mind is that the SCFTA can unlock trade to the tune of $22 billion. That's about 33% in growth, according to data from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Quite a significant leap there we're looking at. But let me cross back to Dr. Mathuki, and one of the concerns that we have, maybe I'm told we should go back to Madam Greenspan once more. One of the concerns which exists is the concern around the uneven landscape of development and industrialization, and what liberalized trade would mean from a competitive landscape. The countries which are less industrialized in the region are concerned that their trade could easily be taken up by the more competitive countries. How do we ensure there is mutual gain as far as the SCFTA is concerned?
Well, I think that that's a very important question. And let me tell you that that's the question of any integration area. I come from Latin America. We have been dealing with that question for a long time. But let me start by saying that you have to take that into account. But I can assure you that the countries that are not benefiting from trade today at least will have an opportunity with the continental free trade area. It will be better for them to be and to negotiate within a continental free trade area than outside that. Because trade has been growing, but inclusive growth has not happened. And the integration of Africa will give an opportunity also to those countries, to the ones that are less industrialized. And first, because they can get into regional value chains in industries that also can develop in those countries, being food processing, being manufacturing, electricity, industrialization of related sectors, digitalization, even for the informal cross-border trade workers. That's an opportunity. So they have a better chance of negotiating the conditions within the continental free trade area than outside the continental free trade area. So I think that the rules of the game are important, that the competition rules are very important, but and you have to take into account that the benefits will spread throughout all the countries, because if not, the continental trade free trade agreement will be weak. But the possibility of doing it is much larger within the free trade agreement than without it.
Thank you. Thank you for that point you have raised there, essentially telling us that it is better for countries to negotiate on what trade experts call the wholesale market, where they are negotiating as a bloc, as opposed to the retail market, where we are negotiating as individual countries. But let me stay with you for a bit, because one of the issues which then emerges is the issue of the rules of origin. To what extent, then, is that a challenge as far as the implementation of the SCFTA is concerned? And what would be your recommendations in terms of the way forward for the continent for streamlining the questions around rules of origin?
Yeah, that's also very important. And the Secretary General from the East African countries have a lot of experience on this. Let me tell you, Africa has a lot of experience because you have a lot of sub-regional integration groups. Yes, so there is already an accumulated experience on that. What we need is convergence, because right now you have a spaghetti ball. Yes, too many, and you know, in our report you can see a chart with all the different groupings and different schemes that Africa have, and that in itself is very difficult to manage. So a process of convergence in the technical rules, in the non-tariff measures, on the rules of origin is of essence for this to really go forward. So let's think not only harmonization is like the end game, but convergence will be already good.
Thank you. Telling us that essentially we need a framework around convergence of the rules of origin. And the question then becomes, given what you have said, is that what is the model that the continent should adopt as far as the tolerance rule is concerned? Because in a continent where a lot of the products we have are imported, to what degree can we say if this proportion of a final product is from the external markets, it then should be deemed to be favorable for the acceptable rules of origin, because finally that is what unlocks trade at the continental landscape?
That's a very good question. But I really think, Julian, that that's an empirical question, not a conceptual question, you know, because at the end, there will be different norms for different products. Yes. Now, if you are too flexible, you have no integration. Yes. If you are not flexible at all, integration is not possible. And how the countries, you know, I don't think that you can find a model, because at the end, you need to have in mind that you want integration, not to get away from the world, but to integrate better with the world. Yes? Because those are two different conceptions. You know, I remember that in the 80s, we talked about open regionalism. You need integration, you need regionalism, but you need to be open, because what you want is not to take away Africa from the world, but integrate intelligently Africa with the world. So that balance will have to be a concrete thing. It cannot be like an ex ante thing. And it has to do with the nature of the imports and the nature of the production inside Africa that will be developed.
Right, and right off the bat of that, there's a question emerging around the place of the micro, small, and medium-sized businesses within the SCFTA framework. And why this question is very important is because we know within the predominantly informal segment of the economy where they operate, value chains are significantly fragmented. So how do we bring them to the table where they can then tap into the dividends of this regional framework?
I think, Julian, that you said the right thing before, you know. First of all, already intra-African trade is more about semi-manufacturing and manufacturing goods. So that already is given more opportunities to small and medium-sized enterprises. And almost in all integration schemes, small and medium-sized enterprises are better integrated into trade than without the integration schemes. So I think that the opportunities are there, but they have to do with the rules of the game. Yes, trade itself is not enough. You need the other things to come with it. You need to simplify the transaction cost. You need to digitalize, you know, your government rules and be able for small and medium-sized enterprises not to have such a huge burden to enter into trade. You need more infrastructure, and you need more inclusive digitalization for them to be able to come in. You need, you know, the framework of e-commerce to be in place, and be very careful because there are a lot of bilateral agreements that are being caused for the countries, and they have to bear in mind that if they will go to an integration scheme, they will have to go to a continental framework and not only to a bilateral framework. But small and medium enterprises will need support in all these areas, in the competition laws, in the digital framework, in the infrastructure, in the transaction costs, to simplify, you know, all the paperwork and all the norms that the governments have. So if we do that, they will be able to integrate much better into the global value chains, or the regional value chains in this case.
Thank you very much, Madam Rebecca Greenspan, for those thoughts, especially regarding the MSMEs and how they can be de-risked to be able to come onto the table and be part of this party of the SEFTA. Let me cross over to Dr. Peter Mathuki of the East African Community. And Madam has just mentioned a very important point around the heavy infrastructure spending that we need. And one of the questions that many African governments are facing right now, especially in light of COVID-19, is the fiscal constraints within which they must execute this infrastructure expansion. So the question becomes, what innovative financing models would work for this region to unlock the potential in the SEFTA?
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, according to the African Development Bank, it suggests that we need almost close to about $170 billion to a year to close these gaps. That, I think, calls for all of us to think innovatively, because I don't think we have a choice. We have to, you know, succeed in our SEFTA, circumstances. And therefore, when I think of now financing options that we have, we could be thinking of how do we have or initiate development finance institutions? How do we put in place institutions to make infrastructure projects bankable by contributing capital, technical expertise, and of course capacity where the private sector cannot be able to do this. So I think it's important as governments coming together and all the stakeholders support or develop institutions, finance institutions that are clearly focusing on infrastructure, because to me that is very, very urgent. But secondly, we could also do, domestic resource mobilization, where governments infrastructure put in place government infrastructure bonds, and and roads levies to be based on a certain percentage on the value of goods imported from a particular partner state. Because now we must, all of us, we are indeed looking to this. We must get out of the comfort zone and do something about it. But also encourage the private sector in partnership, which finance through government-owned financial institutions that raise domestic and overseas market funds on the strength of sovereign guarantees. And fourthly is to now think of build, operate, transfer concessions to a private company to finance, build, and operate a project for a specified period of time. And I think that way we'll now be able to say, within a given time, we should be able to generate funds that support infrastructure that is going to spur the SEFTA. But again, could we have now coordination of our banks, continental banks coming together to strengthen their coordination approach in a way of trying to focus on areas that promote the SEFTA, including the infrastructure, including, for example, strengthening capital markets that will be now geared toward generating funds that support infrastructure. But again, promoting the digital as a digital, promote digital payment systems, because again, that becomes easier. That becomes easier to engage. And finally, it's a revival of national development and investment banks that would deliberately be focusing on very specific areas that promote aspects of the CFTA, including infrastructure. So I think we must now get out of the comfort and start to think innovatively, all of us together, collectively. Task everybody, institutions, government, private sector, and everyone to take part and play a role in ensuring that this SCFTA works, including promoting infrastructure that would spur business in the continent.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Mathuki, for your thoughts regarding the financing models, which we can adopt to ensure that we lay out the infrastructure which will then enable us to unlock the potential of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, speaking to the models such as the build, also the need for domestic resource mobilization through instruments such as government infrastructure bonds. We are now joined on stage by Mr. Yofi Grant, the Chief Executive Officer, Ghana Investment Promotion Center. So glad to have you. And let me just kick off with the same question which I just thrown to Dr. Mathuki. One of the issues which many African governments and countries are facing right now is the question of financing the infrastructure which will support the regional integration within the SCFTA framework. And what innovative financing options do you see on the table for this?
Thank you very much, and my pleasure to be here to all the audience. Indeed, that's a very important question in trying to wrap around the whole ecosystem of investment for trade, because infrastructure is going to be the linking points between countries and their ability to move freely. So that's critical enough. I do know that in the AU Agenda 2063, there are prescriptions as to creating the necessary infrastructure. And of course, the first one that comes in mind is energy, and ensuring that there's enough energy to support businesses to grow. And how do we finance energy? A very important but difficult question, because erstwhile, the view has been that provision of energy, provision of health, some of these social services are the preserves of government. So there's a new window open where private sector can actually partner governments in bringing about financing infrastructure. And the first one I would say is public-private partnerships, where there are investors who would look at infrastructure as a good investment opportunity to link that. Now, with the advent of the AFCFTA, I think that has even become more obvious that infrastructure itself as an investment opportunity is very highly profitable because it connects countries, and there will be a lot more movement across borders. There will be a lot more flights across countries, and there will be a lot more shipping happening on the continent and with the continent. So that should provide a good enough opportunity to structure how the returns can be benefited from. But even beyond that is the whole ecosystem of the legal infrastructure to enable that to happen. Whilst many African countries support open sky policies, we all know that it's a difficult thing traveling across the continent. So that in itself adds another cost, that if we're able to freeze up capital that can go into the physical infrastructure that needs to be paid for. So that's one. The second one is also engaging the necessary reforms to remove quite a number of the bureaucratic processes and make things easier and cheaper for trade to happen. And so for many of the investment promotion agencies, it's their remit to actually go to their governments to seek the necessary reforms to make sure that trading is easier. And then on the back of that is also the fact that we need to also spend a bit more on educating the private sector. One of the misconceptions that I hear from our business people is that they always think that this is a government-to-government venture. But in practicality, it's not. It's actually a massive opportunity for the private sectors of Africa to engage in trade, first in investment and in trade. And if you look at intra-continental investment, it's less than 5%. That means we ourselves are not investing in each other enough. And that needs to be that's a problem that ought to be addressed. Because if we're able to do that, then it frees up the space to open up more opportunities to invest to support infrastructure.
Mr. Yofi, let me just hold you there, and you've unpacked quite a bit, but let me touch on something which I've spoken about, and that is the question of the energy investment. And why that is particularly important is because it is typically very capital intensive. But if you look across the continent, and why skeptics will raise questions around things like the SEFTA is because we have energy power pools, which should be facilitating trade of, for example, Ethiopia has surplus energy, Kenya has a deficit. Where is the challenge in terms of ensuring then we harness the opportunity which is already presented to us when it comes to facilitating trade through the underlying infrastructure which already exists?
That's a difficult question. Because if it was that obvious, we would have done it. The interconnectivity between countries who have excess and those that have deficits, first of all, needs to be bridged. And that requires bilateral agreements, but also a massive multilateral effort to find a standard unitized system where Africa can understand its power needs and reallocate accordingly. And once you've done that, then it opens the door for the infrastructure investments to do that. You need transmission lines, you need distribution lines to connect from one country, like you did say. Ethiopia has excess. And how does it sell it? But it's not just the selling, it's also the pricing. And as we've all come from COP26 and we understand the impact of on energy, on climate change, there seems to be a new drive for a new paradigm for Africa, for example, to decarbonize. And then also look at transition energies. Now, the problem with those is that we clearly understand as a continent that we are resource rich. 90% of the world's platinum is in Africa, 90% of the world's cobalt is in Africa, 75% of the world's coltan is in Africa, 50% of the world's gold is in Africa, not to mention many others. Now, for us to develop means that we have to extract these minerals out of the ground. But if we have to decarbonize, what energy are we going to use to extract from there? That means our reliance on oil and gas needs to be reduced. But we are also rich in oil and gas. And so we need to use that as a means of development. And my proposition is that perhaps Africa should now start moving to actually value its potential assets and use technology to price it through tokenization and then offer that as a proposition to investors. Because if you do that, then you can have a way of actually monetizing what you have under the ground, but you can't bring out because you have to decarbonize. But you get the access to capital to develop the linkages for trade. I think that's very important. And we do agree, Africa is probably the most underserved in terms of power and energy. But we also clearly understand what it means to climate change. So there are great opportunities for solar, there are great opportunities for wind, there are great opportunities for wave technology using seawater. So the opportunities are there. We need to package these as investment opportunities for the private sector because the outcomes, if we are able to execute the AFCFTA, are, I believe, mind-boggling, and that's what's going to drive the next wave of growth in the world. Yeah. I always keep saying that by 2050, Africa will be 1/4 of the world's population. Every fourth person will be an African. Now, can you imagine the sort of consumer market that this is going to create? The interesting thing is that about 70% of that population will still be under the age of 35. Significant opportunity for any investor who wants to be in Africa to now look at it today. Yeah. Because there's a future market waiting.
Okay. Before I cross over to Madam Rebecca Greenspan, let me just latch back onto something you've said. And the counter narrative that people will give you to what you've said is that the investability of some of these potential sources presents a challenge. I'll give you an example. In Kenya right now, there's a conversation around mini-grids. And mini-grids, essentially, private investment is crowded into the space where the government cannot take the main grid. But the private investors will ask you, in the event that the government finally extends its grid to the far-flung areas, what becomes of my investment? Will it be sunk cost? So the investability of it and the ROI, the return on investment, is a very key question when you talk now about within the context of the SEFTA.
I think you you mentioned a very critical thing for the investor. But also imagine if private sector partners with government and says that this is the agreement. You cannot extend your grid right through to the consumer. So we'll fill in. And you need to then partner with us to support the whole environment, the ecosystem, the power ecosystem. So it doesn't have to be one replacing the other. It can be very well one joining with the other. And we are seeing models like that operate, where in countries like Germany, private people are selling it back into the grid when they produce more power than required. I don't see why it can't be done even easier in Africa. So there is a real opportunity for private sector to partner with governments in solving the energy problem. It's not a preserve of the private sector, nor is it a preserve of government. It's a preserve of the consumer. So however you can craft the solution to give energy to the producer to be able to produce must happen. And if it's a partnership between governments and private sector, which happens globally now, I think it's a very important construct that we should engage in.
Fantastic point there by Mr. Yofi Grant. Let me cross over to Rebecca Greenspan and bring in the issue of one of the core components of the SCFTA is the provision of e-commerce and digitalization. But in an environment where the digital divide is still so gaping, how then do we ensure that the landscape is even for everyone to play in that space?
Sorry, Julian. to say something about the former segment, because I think that is very important to make the case for maritime connectivity in Africa in terms of infrastructure. And I think that it should be mentioned specifically. It's energy, sure, but it's also infrastructure in ports and vessels. You know that the numbers are striking because Africa's maritime trade is projected to increase by 188% for bulk and 180% for container cargos. This is a huge opportunity for Africa, and Africa can contribute really to the global containerized trade, which for Africa remains quite low. So this is another opportunity for the Continental Free Trade Agreement. So sorry to say that, but I think that maritime transport, especially because of our experience during this crisis, is very important to take into account for the future. So let me go to the digital part. Sorry. I think that here is very important that in phase three, Africa has already agreed to negotiate the e-commerce rules and the digital rules. And a common framework has to be brought to the table, yes? So it will present tangible opportunities for women and for youth if we do that. And it can potentially open really great opportunities. But I think that if they will start, as has been already announced, to negotiate phase 2 and phase 3, including digitalization from the beginning, we could have a much better framework early on. Because if we wait, then the problem is that the rules of the game in e-commerce will be established before the continental free trade area can have a common framework. I think that the common framework will be really important from the beginning.
Thank you for those thoughts, essentially telling us that we need a common framework for rules of engagement when it comes to the e-commerce landscape. Dr. Peter Mathuki, your thoughts on the issue of e-commerce, SCFTA, and the fact that we still have a very gaping digital divide in the continent.
Yeah, thank you very much. We must appreciate that the future is digital. It's not only the future, but now. The way the world is today is digital. I don't think we have a choice. We must reshape and organize ourselves around that. But again, looking at the opportunities availed by the challenges of COVID-19, which again was a wake-up call, where literally almost businesses went completely off. I think it's an important opportunity here that that we need to take and say, do we now put in place, I agree, negotiations, the e-commerce protocol that Madam is talking about, so that we now improve issues to do with e-commerce related transactions around support SCFTA? Do we now, do we put in place frameworks that facilitate? Do we now start supporting already the existing, e-commerce startups? Almost over close to 300 e-commerce startups. How can they be supported, given the right, financial and technical support, but also ensure that we put in place legal frameworks that support that kind of engagement. That is the way to go. So I think to me it's a high time now we embrace it. We put in place the frameworks that will really support it, not only in terms of most importantly legal framework that would facilitate that, but also support the young people, the youth who are available and ready to really take up this. So many people, and again taking advantage of this, how many jobs can be created by this. So I think it's a high time that we need to take up this and create opportunity for businesses, but also create employment for our youth going forward. Potentially can generate over 3 million jobs by 2025. So we can really start it up and embrace it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peter Mathuki, for your thoughts on the digital landscape. And let me cross over now to Mr. Yofi Grant here with me on set. Underlying the question of the digital divide is the aspect of cost. And one of the predicaments that players are now having is that if you look across the continent and really across the world, the question of the digital services tax is now being introduced. It took effect in Kenya not too far back, and a few other countries in the region. So how then do we ensure that we are scaling down on the cost and ramping up on accessibility, while also appreciating on the other side that governments are facing fiscal constraints, and in their pursuit for more revenue, they're coming up with digital services tax?
You ask a very interesting question, because in Ghana, we've just gone through a situation where we are taxing mobile money.
I do want to mention that.
But okay, first of all, we must all admit that one of a friend said to me that there are two constant things in this world, God and taxes. So taxes have to be paid somehow, and particularly where it's more effective for a government to tax consumption, that's where to put the taxes on. And we admittedly do agree that the technology landscape is becoming almost now wholesale. Everywhere, technology is becoming a very important part of our distribution networks, our consumption networks, our trade networks, even our investment networks. So how do we ensure that we bring down the cost to engage more people into the technology space, to be able to use technology as a tool for trade or a tool for settlements, etc., etc.? Now, first of all, we need to understand the cost structure of our technology. Why is our technology expensive? And I can give you what I suspect are a couple of reasons. First of all, we hardly own our data. If I want to find out about you today, where would be the easiest place to go to? Google.
Yes.
Google is not an African platform. And so Africa, first of all, needs to have a system where all of us as countries need to come together and say that, okay, we probably need a platform like China has done, where we own our data. So if we want to find out something from another African, I have an African platform that I can go to and get the data. Because so far as you're using an external source, it adds a cost to it. Secondly, we need to build the requisite data centers that are going to support commerce or e-commerce. And in the absence of that, it's another cost to it. I'm happy to say that there are quite a number of investors looking at setting up regional data centers in Ghana to be able to contain the traffic of commerce that will come out of AFCFTA. But the question you ask is, how do we reduce the cost? How do we reduce the taxes on it? I suspect the best mechanism is to enable as many people as possible to use technology.
Yeah.
Because then you spread the net. And once you spread the net, you can actually bring down the cost. But so far as it's just a limited number of people in the technology space, then the costs are going to be high on the tax per user. But it's possible, because I know in Ghana, for example, there are farmers who rely on their mobile phones. And these are illiterates who've never been to school, for pricing using an app provided by a company called Isoko, which came from Southern Africa.
Yeah.
It provides them daily prices. Now they rely on it. So a lot of the farmers suddenly buy phones to be able to use it. The more we rely on phones, and it's going to get there, as payment platforms, and the more we rely on technology as payment platforms for our commercial engagement, I suspect that the more the prices are going to come down per unit or per user.
Yeah.
And that would enable then more people get in there. It's like a chicken and egg situation, but you need to understand what outcomes you're expecting and how you're going to ensure that those outcomes spread out to a broader people. The African economy is about 85% SMEs and SMIs. Most of them are small, so for them, technology is it's a tool that they cannot do without. It's easy. I sit here. There's actually a platform that is not African that I can use to look for goods in Dubai easily. Can we create one for Africa that enables me to look at products in Kenya, products in Rwanda, products in South Africa, products in Morocco, products in Liberia, which I can buy? The second challenge will be payment systems. Therefore, we need a standard unitized payment system such that I can pay goods I buy from Kenya from my mobile phone. The more we are able to do that, the more the cost is going to come down and the more people are going to use it. And sometimes we need to actually drive the usage to bring down the cost. In my simple thinking, I think that's one area where we can actually reduce the taxes on mobile sets.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Yofi Grant, telling us essentially, let's push the volumes, squeeze the margins, and bring down the cost. Unfortunately, I'm told we have to stop at that point. I want to thank so much my panelists. That is Madam Rebecca Greenspan from UNCTAD. Thank you so much for being with us. Dr. Peter Mathuki from ESC. Thank you so much for being with us. And Mr. Yofi Grant, it's been such a delight to have you on set. Let me now hand over the program to Peter. Thank you.
Hello. Julian, thank you very much. Very wonderful panel. Truly enjoyed it. And now, ladies and gentlemen, if I can kindly call onto the stage the Deputy Minister for Tourism, Arts and Culture. He's in the person of the Honorable Mark Okreku Mante. Before him, we'll take a look at a video from Ghana Tourism Authority.
Ministers of State, the business community, members of the diplomatic corps, my friends from the media, Akwaba, welcome. Today, we host 30 speakers from 10 countries here in Accra and several thousands through the power of new media. We continue the conversations that will help transform the continent of Africa. We are grateful that you have agreed to be part of this event. On behalf of the Ghana Tourism Authority, we thank the Nation Media Group and all its partners for choosing Ghana. Ghana is indeed becoming the new hub of meetings in Africa. We are hopeful that the partnership we have forged through this festival will continue and that together we will build a resilient and strong Africa. An Africa of partnerships, an Africa of hope, and an Africa we can all be proud of. We welcome you to our beautiful country. Stay blessed and enjoy the conversations. Akwaba, once again.
A quick musical interlude. Thank you very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, if I can invite the Deputy Minister of Tourism, Arts and Culture, the Honourable Mark Okreku Mante.
Hello. Our own Honorable Osafo, Senior Advisor to the President, Your Excellency Wakamli Mene, Secretary General of AFTA, Your Excellencies, High Commissioners, and then Ambassadors, Nana Sewa Bunsu, President for Queen Mother's Foundation of Ghana, I understand you're here with some of your members, Louis Otieno, Non-Executive Director of the team NMG, Stephen Gatagama, CEO of NMG, and then Dr. Wilfred Kiboro, Chairman for NMG. By the way, NMG means Nation Media Group. And then our media friends. On behalf of the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture, I would want to welcome all of you. And then those of you who are coming from other countries, I welcome you to the center of the world, which is Ghana. I want to say thank you to the organizers of this program for bringing us on board, because it is worth coming and it is worth doing. I've listened to some of the speakers over the past hours, and I have learned a lot. I do not need to bore you with some of the statistics of the impact of COVID-19 on Africa or on the tourism and arts industry. But I'm sure we all know that we've lost businesses, income, and then jobs. The challenge, I've heard some of the earlier speakers mention, whilst we have some countries with excess vaccines, Africa is still struggling to have some of us vaccinated. And we have less than 10% of our people vaccinated. I think that it should be a wake-up call. It should motivate us. It should ignite us to see things differently. As Africans, it's about time we came together, find a midpoint, and then begin to think of how we can have our own vaccines for now and then for future. Intra-African trade is the biggest asset I think we have at the moment as people of Africa. 1.3 billion people, GDP of $3 trillion is a big asset that all Africans must take advantage of. We need to create jobs because the market is big. We need to have support for SMEs because in Ghana, especially, we have about 90% of our workforce within the SME space. We cannot do all these things when our people do not have a degree of education to grow our economies. May we all stand and welcome the President of the Republic of Ghana. We may sit, please. And so, as I talk about education, we cannot take away the policy of free SHS that through the President of the Republic of Ghana, President Akufo-Addo, today we have 1.6 million extra people who have joined the traditional numbers in our educational system. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not forget that it will not be out of place if we recognize the technical and the vocational educational system as well in decision making. Let's empower our women and compete and contribute to the economies of Africa, because they contribute about 50% of Africa's population. Let's give them some business support. We are in this together, and like I've said earlier on, AfCFTA is the biggest asset Africa has now. I believe in synergy, and so if we agree that we're going to do this together, then we are so sure that there's some light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you for having us as Ministry of Tourism, Art and Culture to be part of this discussion. Again, as I come from the Tourism Ministry, I must let you know that the place for Christmas is Ghana. And so December in GH is hashtag Beyond the Return, hashtag. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, the Deputy Minister of Tourism, Arts and Culture, the Honorable Marco Krekumante. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to hand over to my colleague, the General Manager of Asase Radio, Prince Moses Oforiatta, to add a special touch to the moderation of this very extraordinary segment.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Africa, as we all know, is a resource-rich continent that has been and will continue to be a source of wealth to the rest of the world. We are also very diverse as a people. Our history is laden with examples of greatness, and we can make this continent a world all its own. But almost all the roads of our post-colonial trade narratives have been designed to lead to capitals that aren't on the continent. The carving up of Africa was a colonial sustainability plan that set in motion a brilliant ethnographic conundrum that maintains what Johan Galtung, a writer, expressed in 1971 as a structural theory of imperialism. In a recent conversation with the Minister for Finance of Ghana, Honorable Ken Oforiatta, I came to understand how efforts to move away from the dependency frameworks on which most of our economies are built have been hampered by colonial-era commercial arrangements. This should change. And so the question is, how do we reverse these roads for them to lead to African capitals? Notwithstanding the layers of bilateral and multilateral arrangements and agreements, as well as the physical infrastructure that actually point and lead towards places that are not our own. Two powerful ideas have emerged in the past few years. An Africa Beyond Aid is underpinned by the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. And today, all roads have led to Accra, a journey that has been enhanced by the easterly trade winds called KUSI in Swahili. Africa is today a continent of opportunity, of hope, and of confidence. Brought to you by the Nation Media Group and Ghana Tourism Authority in association with Asase Broadcasting Company. Asase Radio, KUSI Ideas Festival is what it is. A festival of ideas that has arisen from the and that is moving towards the West, and it's here. So, this two-day Ideas Laboratory promises a resplendent panoply of speakers, panelists, and participants who are all here to lend their brains to what has become a rendezvous point for finding solutions to African issues, such as how Africa transforms after the virus. So from trade to tech to innovation, diaspora things, vaccines, movement and infrastructure, climate change, agriculture, the media, and the creative arts industry, the KUSI Ideas Festival 2021 is everybody's matter. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our presidential perspectives on new policy directions following the pandemic brings together the views of three presidents. We've got His Excellency President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda. We've got His Excellency Paul Kagame of Rwanda. And we've got President Nana Akufo-Addo of Ghana. We would also like to recognize the presence of His Excellency, the Secretary General of AFCFTA, Mr. Wamkele Mene. Ladies and gentlemen, we will start with a short video, a short message from His Excellency President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda.
Uganda, I greet you, and I want to share with you what we have learned from this corona pandemic. First of all, corona is a killer. We have found that the corona is a killer for the weak. We have lost about 3,000 people here since the corona started. The ones who have been infected have been 120,000 something, but about 100,000 have recovered. Those who got sick, who got severely sick and who died were mainly the weak, the one who were above the age of 50, but also some of whom had other conditions like diabetes and other diseases. So this is the first point, that it is a killer for especially the ones who are weak. Secondly, in order to stop it, and we stopped it, we really struggled with it. In order to stop it effectively and decisively, we had to disrupt big sectors of the economy. So it is very disruptive of some sectors. Tourism, the hospitality industry, at one time transport, all these were disrupted. So that is the second characteristic. However, we discovered that it was preventable because we prevented it from spreading. In fact, when we took these staff measures, initially we lost very few people up to end of April. After 1 year, for a whole 12 months, we lost only 300 people who died. It was because of the indiscipline of some actors who were not listening to our advice that from May we got to the second wave, which caused the death of the other 3,000, the additional. So it was preventable because really the virus is the one which was spreading. It was people who were spreading it. From an infected person, the virus would only go for 2 meters. Beyond that, it would not infect anybody. And it would only infect you through the nose, the eyes, or the mouth. Not through the skin, not through other channels like some of the other diseases. And that was if you use unwashed hands. If you did not wash your hands and you touched your face, you touched your nose, you touched your mouth, you would be infected. Otherwise, even if you touch something infected, but you wash with soap, just soap, the virus would disintegrate apparently. You didn't even have to use the sanitizers. Even soap, ordinary soap, could kill it. And then there were the unsanitized surfaces, tables, and so on. So it was preventable. This is the third characteristic we saw. The other two characteristics are there: killer of the weak, disruptive of the sectors of the economy. Not all. For instance, agriculture was not very much affected directly. Even manufacturing, if you took some precautions, continued. It was mainly some sectors, tourism, the hospitality industry, etc., that were affected. So the third characteristic is that, in spite of all that, it was preventable. Number 4, it was vaccinatable. It was discovered quite early on that a vaccine could be developed. Unlike AIDS, which has taken us so long to develop a vaccine, this one could actually be vaccinated against. Here in Uganda, our people have even been trying, number 5, have been trying antivirals, some antiviral compounds, which seem to have saved a lot of people, although they are still going scientific evaluation. So therefore, our conclusion is that, yes, this is a very bad disease for factors I have mentioned above, but it can be defeated. Now, finally, it was unfortunate that when the vaccine started coming on the scene, some people decided to be selfish and monopolize the vaccine they were vaccinating, they were manufacturing. That, of course, is a good lesson for us, the Africans. That's why here in Uganda, we are really working hard to develop our own vaccine. And we are moving very well, although we had a lot of obstacles, but we are moving well. So, in short, those are our lessons from this corona. It was a killer for the weak, especially. It was disruptive for some of the sectors of the economy, but it was preventable by public health measures, preventive measures. Then, number 4, it is vaccinatable against. And then number 5, for us, in the case of Uganda, we have some antivirals. And 6th, for us, we are struggling to manufacture our own, to make our own vaccine. Although, of course, we have imported other vaccines from other places, but we are really moving well on making our own vaccine. I thank you, and I wish you a successful conference.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, that was His Excellency President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni of Uganda. Next is a message from His Excellency President Paul Kagame of Rwanda.
State and government, Dr. Wilfred Kiboro, Chairman of Nation Media Group, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me start by congratulating Nation Media Group for putting together this 3rd edition of the KUSI Ideas Festival in these very challenging circumstances. This past year, Much progress has been made towards Africa's recovery, but we still have a long way to go. In Rwanda, we have learned that transformation is a continuous process that requires thinking ahead to build a more resilient future. Going forward, as we continue building the Africa we want, let us apply the same mindset. The KUSI Ideas Festival is about innovation. For one, technology constantly creates new and better ways to share ideas. In essence, that's what the African Continental Free Trade Area aims to facilitate. We need to see significant investment in the digital capabilities of our people, especially young people. Second, climate-smart agriculture should be scaled up. Even with the dual threat of COVID-19 and food insecurity, as we are currently witnessing, this practice would improve productivity while keeping our environment safe. Lastly, innovations should be introduced in the delivery of social protection to adapt to shocks with the support of the private sector. These three items are all part of the important conversations taking place at the KUSI Ideas Festival. The level of cooperation in Africa since the beginning of the pandemic has been encouraging. Beyond the crisis, we will need to continue working together to see tangible results. Please continue counting on Rwanda's support for this homegrown African initiative. I wish you a successful conference, and I thank you for your kind attention.
That was His Excellency, the President of Rwanda, President Paul Kagame. The KUSI Ideas Festival was first established to mark the Nation Media Group's 60th anniversary. It is a pan-African platform to examine the continent's place in the world, its citizens' problem-solving innovation, and how these prepare us to deal with coming challenges. It aims to contribute to shaping the agenda to position Africa as a leading player in global politics and economics. On behalf of the President of Ghana, whose presence here speaks to the essence of regional collaboration, we have representing him former senior minister, senior advisor to the President of Ghana, Honorable Osafo Mafo, who will deliver a short message on behalf of the President. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, Honorable Yao Osafo Mafo.
Your Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, President of the Republic of Ghana, Chairman, Honorable Deputy Minister for Tourism, Arts and Culture, members of the Diplomatic Corps, the CEO, Ghana Tourism Authority, friends from the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. To give you a very short message on behalf of His Excellency the President, and I will invite him personally to open the KUSI Idea Festival. I welcome all of you to Ghana and to our city, Accra. Over the past few years, Ghana has positioned itself as the meetings hub of Africa, and hosting this event is in keeping to our plan to attract meetings, conferences, and events as part of our trade and tourism agenda for the development of this country. We embrace the spirit of KUSI, named after the trade winds that blow over the Indian Ocean. It's a Swahili language. The KUSI Idea Festival looks at the modern 21st century currents and winds that keep the wider African part of the global system, shape its future, and define its response to the world and itself. It dreams of the connections of transport and railway corridors that connect East Africa to West Africa, Southern Africa to North Africa, and 1,000 points in between. Accra is the headquarters of the African Continental Free Trade, ACTA, and it has become the main convergence market between Africa and the Black diaspora. And we are glad that the Nation Media Group wishes to begin tapping into this stream. Ghana stands as one of the points of modern African